It began with a single pop. One video, uploaded almost casually to YouTube in 2015, showed a dermatologist in California gently pressing her gloved hands against a patient's skin. A small cyst gave way, releasing years of buildup in a single, strangely satisfying burst. What might have been a private, even embarrassing medical moment transformed into something else entirely, an internet phenomenon. Within days, the clip had racked up millions of views, comments, and shares. Strangers around the globe were united by a curious mix of fascination, relief, and empathy. And the woman behind it all, Dr. Sandra Lee, would soon be known to the world by a new name, Dr. Pimple Popper. Her rise was nothing short of extraordinary. At a time when YouTube was still discovering its power to make stars overnight, Sandra Lee tapped into something few could have predicted. The content was intimate, visceral, even taboo, and yet it was impossible to look away. Viewers didn't just watch, they lingered, they subscribed, they begged for more. For some, it was the thrill of watching something gross yet satisfying. For others, it was deeply personal, seeing their own struggles with acne, cysts, and scars reflected and understood without judgment. But Sandra wasn't just feeding curiosity. With every video, she spoke calmly, explained clearly, and treated her patients with compassion. She wasn't sensationalizing, she was normalizing. Skin conditions that had left people ashamed or isolated were suddenly being shown in the open, treated with dignity and care. She made the invisible visible, the stigmatized human again. And that combination of medical skill, gentle bedside manner, and raw honesty would propel her far beyond the confines of YouTube. Fast forward nearly a decade, and Sandra Lee's name is no longer just a trending tag on social media. She's built a global brand, anchored her own primetime shows, and most recently launched a brand new chapter with Lifetime's Dr. Pimple Popper Breaking Out. No longer just a solo viral star, she's expanded her clinic, taken on proteges, and opened her personal life to audiences in ways fans never expected. From internet sensation to television mentor, her evolution reflects not only her own journey, but also the changing way we, as viewers, engage with stories of medicine, vulnerability, and transformation. So how did it all happen? How did a dermatologist with a camera and a YouTube channel transform into a cultural icon, shaping reality television and redefining how we see skin and ourselves? Tonight, we peel back the story of Dr. Sandra Lee's evolution from that first viral pop to the new world she's building on Lifetime. To understand Sandra Lee's extraordinary rise, we need to rewind to the mid-2010s. YouTube was maturing into a cultural powerhouse, but the kinds of content that thrived there were still experimental. Comedy sketches, makeup tutorials, video game walkthroughs, these were the big players. Few would have predicted that dermatology, of all things, could break through. Sandra Lee was already a practicing dermatologist in Upland, California, with a loyal patient base. But she also had something else, a keen awareness of how digital platforms could amplify her reach. With a simple decision to record and share clips from her procedures, she tapped into an undercurrent of human curiosity that was both primal and oddly comforting. At first, the clip seemed almost too niche to matter. Who of all would want to watch blackheads being squeezed or cysts being drained? But Sandra understood what many others overlooked. These videos weren't just about the visuals. They were about release, relief, the momentary satisfaction of watching something unpleasant resolved and made clean. She leaned into the psychology, not by exaggerating, but by offering an honest, clinical view. Soon, her uploads gained traction. The comment section became a confessional of sorts. People wrote about how they couldn't stop watching before bed, how they felt a wave of calm from hearing her voice, how they related to the patients in ways they never expected. Others admitted they struggled with skin conditions of their own, and watching Sandra work gave them comfort. It was as though by watching someone else's problem resolved, they were finding a sense of healing for themselves. The internet had seen oddly satisfying content before: slime squishes, soap cutting, hydraulic press videos. This was different. It was raw, unfiltered, deeply human. Each patient was more than a medical case. They were a story, a face, a voice, and Sandra didn't treat them like spectacles. She treated them with dignity. She would explain the condition gently, reassure her patient with humor or empathy, and only then proceed with the procedure. This mix of science, compassion, and catharsis set her apart. Viewers weren't just voyeurs, they were participants in a ritual of relief. Each extraction became a symbolic cleansing, an act of removing something that had been hidden or suppressed. The phenomenon wasn't just medical, it was psychological. Of course, not everyone understood. Some critics dismissed her videos as grotesque or exploitative, but for every skeptic, there were thousands of devoted fans who saw something deeper. They recognized her ability to take something stigmatized and transform it into a moment of empowerment. Patients who had spent years hiding were suddenly being celebrated, not in spite of their condition, but because they had the courage to face it publicly. By 2016 and 2017, Dr. Pimple Popper wasn't just a username on YouTube, it was a global brand. Interviews began, social media buzz intensified, and Sandra found herself at the center of a movement she hadn't fully anticipated. What started as a few uploads had snowballed into a cultural touchstone. The internet had crowned its dermatology queen. And while the clicks and views were undeniable, the real power lay in the connection. Behind each cyst or blackhead was a person, and behind every video was Sandra's quiet reminder: skin is human, and so are we. By 2018, the internet phenomenon known as Dr. Pimple Popper had reached a crossroads. Sandra Lee wasn't just a viral sensation anymore. She was a household name. Her YouTube channel had amassed millions of subscribers, and her videos were generating hundreds of millions of views. But what had started as an experiment on social media was about to make a giant leap, from the small screen in our hands to the bigger screen in our living rooms. That leap came in the form of a partnership with TLC. The network, known for embracing unconventional yet emotionally resonant programming, saw the potential in Sandra's work. They didn't just see the gross yet satisfying allure of her videos. They saw the emotional core, the human transformations, the stories of resilience, and the chance to tell them in a way that went beyond a 3-minute YouTube clip. And so, Dr. Pimple Popper, the television series, was born. The format shifted from quick viral bursts to full-length episodes that gave audiences a more intimate look at the patients' lives. This was no longer just about the extraction. It was about the journey. Viewers met patients in their homes, heard their backstories, and felt the weight of the struggles they had endured: social stigma, physical pain, years of hiding behind clothes or hairstyles to conceal their conditions. On television, Sandra became more than the internet's favorite dermatologist. She became a lifeline. Patients often described her as their last hope. Many had been turned away by other doctors, told their conditions were untreatable or not worth the risk. But Sandra welcomed them. She listened, she reassured, and she treated them not as curiosities, but as people whose quality of life could be restored. One of the most memorable arcs from this era was that of a young girl with a growth on her ear. For years, she had endured stares and comments, unable to wear earrings or feel at ease. When she sat in Sandra's chair, it wasn't just about removing tissue, it was about giving a child back her confidence. Watching her smile after surgery, touching her ear for the first time without pain or embarrassment, viewers realized what the show was really about. It wasn't the pop that mattered, it was the transformation. The TLC years also brought criticism. Some observers argued that the show was voyeuristic, exploiting patients' vulnerabilities for entertainment. But Sandra consistently pushed back against this narrative. For her, the spotlight wasn't on the extraction, it was on the patient's courage. By sharing their stories, she believed they were helping others who might be suffering silently. And for many fans, she was right. Letters poured in from people who felt seen for the first time, who finally felt brave enough to seek treatment themselves. The move to television also solidified Sandra's persona as a dual figure. She was both a medical professional grounded in science and a media personality who understood the rhythms of storytelling. She could explain sebaceous cysts and lipomas in clear, accessible terms, but she also knew how to frame a patient's emotional journey so viewers could relate. By the time the show had aired several seasons, Sandra Lee had crossed a threshold few medical professionals ever imagined. She wasn't just healing patients in her clinic, she was educating, inspiring, and entertaining millions around the world. And she was setting the stage for an even bigger transformation, the evolution from solo star to mentor, a role that would define her next chapter. By early 2025, Sandra Lee had already built a remarkable legacy. She had conquered YouTube, turned medical storytelling into mainstream entertainment on TLC, and transformed countless lives in her clinic. But even with all that success, there was a sense that her story wasn't finished. Something new was brewing. Something that would take her from being the face of dermatology to becoming a mentor, a leader, and the anchor of a bigger vision. That turning point arrived in March 2025 when Lifetime announced Dr. Pimple Popper breaking out. The press release felt almost like a coronation. This wasn't simply a continuation of her TLC years, it was an expansion. The title itself carried weight, breaking out. It was both a clever nod to dermatology and a signal that Sandra was moving into uncharted territory. The show promised to give viewers everything they loved, the intimate patient stories, the rare conditions most doctors only read about in textbooks, and the emotional transformations that left audiences in tears. But it also introduced something fresh. For the first time, Sandra wouldn't be working alone. She would be joined by protégés, medical students, and early career dermatologists eager to learn under her guidance. This shift from solo star to mentor marked a profound evolution in her career. Inside the clinic, viewers saw more than just patient rooms. They saw an expanded facility. A new wing had been added with additional space for patients, doctors, and staff. The visual message was clear. This wasn't just one doctor with a YouTube channel anymore. This was a thriving medical hub, a place where the next generation could be trained while patients received life-changing care. And then there were the patients themselves. Lifetime leaned heavily into the emotional core of their stories. One that stood out early on was Chalamar, a woman who had endured years of ridicule over a keloid scar on her chest. A piercing gone wrong had left her with a growth so prominent that even her dating life was scarred by it. One cruel man had referred to it as a turd. The humiliation was unbearable. When Chalamar sat in Sandra's chair, her vulnerability was palpable. Viewers weren't just watching a medical procedure, they were witnessing the unraveling of years of shame. When the keloid was removed and her chest healed, her confidence seemed to bloom in real time. It was a moment that captured exactly why Sandra's work mattered. But breaking out wasn't only about the patients or the protégés. For the first time, Sandra invited cameras into her personal life in a way that felt raw and unfiltered. Through self-shot footage, audiences glimpsed her life outside the clinic. We saw her navigating the transition of becoming an empty nester, with her children grown and her home in West Los Angeles feeling quieter than before. These moments added depth to her public persona. She wasn't just the unflappable doctor in gloves and goggles. She was a woman experiencing change, reflecting on her own next chapter while guiding others through theirs. The response was immediate. Fans lit up TikTok and Instagram with reactions to her posts. Sandra herself teased new episodes with short, playful clips, often reminding followers that a brand new episode is on tonight. Lifetime's marketing leaned into this social-first approach, making each Monday night feel like an event. Clips from the show, patients hugging, Sandra laughing with her staff, protégés nervously preparing, went viral, echoing the energy of her YouTube roots, but elevated to a polished television production. Media outlets amplified the buzz. People magazine ran exclusives, highlighting how Breaking Out combined the cases you've never seen before with a mentorship twist. Channel Guide described it as a hybrid of heartfelt medical reality and character-driven storytelling. Fans, both longtime popaholics and newcomers drawn in by the drama, praised the balance. The procedure still satisfied, but the human stories hit harder than ever. In many ways, Breaking Out symbolized Sandra's transformation as much as her patients. No longer just the lone dermatologist with a viral channel, she had grown into a mentor, a leader, and a storyteller whose reach extended beyond her own hands. It was proof that evolution isn't just about leaving something behind. It's about expanding into something greater. And as the credits rolled on the first episodes, one thing became clear. The Queen of Popping had broken out once again, this time into a role that promised to shape not only her legacy, but the very future of dermatology on television. If Breaking Out was Sandra Lee's declaration of a new era, the heart of that declaration lay in her role as a mentor. For years, fans had watched her as the steady, confident hand behind each procedure, the reassuring voice explaining every step. But now, with cameras capturing not only her patients, but also her protégés, a new dimension of Dr. Pimple Popper came into focus. Inside the clinic, the dynamic shifted. Sandra was no longer just the star, she was the teacher. Early career dermatologists and medical students walked the halls of her newly expanded facility, carrying notebooks, asking questions, and looking at her with a mix of awe and nerves. They weren't just there to watch, they were there to learn, to absorb the lessons that had made Sandra not only a skilled physician, but also a trusted figure to millions. Mentorship in medicine is never just about technique. Yes, Sandra taught them how to identify a lipoma, how to safely excise a cyst, how to manage scar tissue. But what stood out most were the softer lessons. Compassion comes first, she would remind them. There's always a person attached to the condition. It was this philosophy, this insistence on seeing the whole human behind the medical issue that had fueled her rise from viral videos to mainstream fame. Now, she was instilling it into the next generation. Viewers could see the impact almost immediately. A nervous medical student might hesitate before making an incision, only to be steadied by Sandra's calm encouragement. A young doctor might marvel at the complexity of a case, while Sandra would gently remind them that the patient in the chair had lived with this for years, sometimes decades. These moments of guidance were as powerful as the procedures themselves. They showcased a ripple effect, one doctor's compassion multiplying through many. It was also impossible to ignore how perfectly this mentor role fit the stage of life Sandra herself was in. With her own children grown and her home in Los Angeles quieter than it once was, she was channeling her nurturing instincts into her practice. The empty nest at home gave rise to a full nest at the clinic, protégés filling the spaces once occupied by bedtime routines and teenage chatter. In this way, Breaking Out felt almost autobiographical, reflecting not just Sandra's professional arc, but also her personal transition. Fans responded warmly to this shift. Many praised her for opening doors in a field that can often feel closed to outsiders. Others saw it as the natural next step for someone who had always blended teaching with care, whether through a YouTube video or a TV episode. In her protégés, viewers saw continuity. Sandra's legacy wasn't just in the patients she healed, it was in the doctors she trained, the philosophies she passed on, the empathy she modeled. By stepping into the role of mentor, Sandra Lee expanded her influence beyond her own two hands. She was no longer just treating patients, she was shaping the future of dermatology itself. And for audiences, this realization added another layer of meaning. Watching her work now meant watching a legacy in the making.
For all her visibility on YouTube and television, Sandra Lee had always kept much of her personal life behind the curtain. Fans knew her as the steady-handed dermatologist, the empathetic explainer, the woman in goggles and gloves who could make even the most intimidating growth seem manageable. But with breaking out, she chose to show something different. Sandra, the woman at home, outside the clinic walls. Through self-shot footage woven into the Lifetime series, viewers glimpsed a side of her that had rarely been seen. No bright surgical lights, no steady stream of patients, just Sandra in the quieter rhythms of daily life. She spoke candidly about becoming an empty nester, a stage of life that many of her fans could relate to. Her children, who had grown up largely outside of the public eye, were now out of the house, leaving her and her husband to navigate a home that felt at once familiar and strangely empty. This new honesty added texture to her story. It was one thing to watch her mentor young doctors or transform patients' lives, but it was another to see her reflect on her own transitions. Moving to West Los Angeles symbolized a fresh chapter, personally and professionally. She wasn't just expanding her clinic, she was also reimagining her life outside of it. And perhaps most endearing was her willingness to be vulnerable about her own skin. Sandra opened up about her struggles with eczema, a reminder that even the most celebrated dermatologists live with the very conditions they treat. By acknowledging her own challenges, she made herself more relatable, grounding her fame in the same humanity she always extended to her patients. These glimpses beyond the clinic didn't distract from the show, they enriched it. They made viewers feel as though they knew her, not just as the pop queen, but as a woman experiencing change, grappling with quiet shifts, and still finding ways to grow. In sharing her private moments, Sandra reminded audiences that evolution isn't only about career milestones. It's about life itself, the small, intimate transitions that shape who we are when the cameras turn off.
The fascination with Dr. Sandra Lee has never been just about the medical procedures. Yes, there's the undeniable draw of the oddly satisfying moment, the instant release, the relief of seeing years of buildup vanish in seconds. But what breaking out made even clearer is that her story has become something larger, something cultural. Sandra Lee isn't just a dermatologist on television. She's a symbol of empathy, resilience, and acceptance in a world often obsessed with perfection. At a time when filters dominate social media and influencers build brands on flawless skin, Sandra offered the opposite. She put real skin on camera, skin with scars, lumps, cysts, and imperfections. And rather than shaming it, she humanized it. Every episode of her show reminded viewers that behind every blemish is a human being with a story worth telling. In doing so, she gave countless people permission to stop hiding. Fan reactions across platforms reflected this shift. On TikTok, clips of patients hugging her after surgery or smiling into the mirror for the first time in years quickly went viral. On Instagram, her teasers for new episodes drew thousands of comments from people thanking her for giving visibility to conditions they had struggled with privately. Some admitted they had been too embarrassed to see a doctor until they watched her show and realized they weren't alone. Others shared stories of showing her videos to children or parents who finally felt understood. The cultural impact went beyond individual patients. Dr. Lee's blend of medical science and emotional storytelling changed the way reality television approached health. Where once the genre thrived on shock value or humiliation, Sandra brought dignity.
She turned what could have been exploitation into a celebration of courage. By framing each procedure as a step toward renewal, she transformed dermatology into a universal metaphor for healing. Internationally, her reach was just as profound. Fans across countries where dermatology isn't as accessible found hope in her episodes. The universal language of empathy transcended borders. Whether you lived in Los Angeles or Manila, the sight of a patient reclaiming confidence resonated. Her catchphrase moments, gentle encouragements, reassuring explanations, became rallying points for a global community of popaholics who gathered not just for the pops, but for the people. Even critics who once dismissed her YouTube videos as voyeuristic found themselves acknowledging the social value of her work. For many, Sandra Lee had flipped the script. What once seemed like a guilty pleasure now carried the weight of meaningful storytelling. She had proven that even the strangest internet obsessions could evolve into cultural touchstones when handled with compassion. Ultimately, the fan response revealed something profound. People weren't addicted to watching pus or cysts. They were addicted to watching people transform, to seeing shame give way to pride, pain give way to relief, invisibility give way to recognition. And at the center of it all was Sandra Lee, the dermatologist who became a cultural icon by daring to show what most of us tried to hide. By the summer of 2025, it was clear that Breaking Out had struck a chord. The ratings were strong, the social media chatter relentless, and the emotional stories continued to ripple across audiences. It didn't take long for Lifetime to make its move. In August, the network announced that Dr. Sandra Lee's series would return for a second season, this time with a full order of 20 episodes. The renewal wasn't just another TV milestone, it was a statement. Networks don't commit to that kind of expansion unless they see something more than numbers. What Lifetime recognized was that Sandra had managed to create a format that was both educational and emotionally magnetic. The blend of rare medical cases, heartfelt patient journeys, and a mentorship-driven clinic had given viewers something they couldn't find anywhere else. For Sandra, the renewal signaled both continuity and growth. More episodes meant more opportunities to highlight conditions many had never even heard of. It meant more patients finding courage to step forward, knowing their stories could inspire others. And it meant more protégés gaining invaluable experience under her wing. In many ways, Season 2 promised to be less about the spectacle of popping and more about the ripple effects of mentorship, how one doctor's influence multiplies through many hands. The future of Breaking Out also raised intriguing possibilities for reality television itself. Could this mentorship model inspire other medical shows to follow suit? Could the genre, often criticized for exploiting pain, evolve into something that educates and uplifts? Sandra's success suggested that it could. Behind the scenes, Sandra's personal journey mirrored the show's growth. As she settled further into life in West Los Angeles and embraced her role as both mentor and cultural figure, her evolution seemed to reflect the very transformations she facilitated in her patients. Just as they walked out of her clinic with newfound confidence, Sandra stepped into each new season with a deeper sense of purpose. And so, as fans looked ahead to Season 2, the excitement wasn't just about the cases or the pops. It was about the promise of more healing, more learning, more stories that could change the way we see ourselves and each other. Sandra Lee wasn't just renewing a television contract, she was renewing a movement.
When we look back at Sandra Lee's journey, it's almost hard to believe how far it has come. From a single video of a cyst on YouTube to millions of subscribers, from being known as the Pimple Popper on the internet to becoming a household name on TLC, and finally to her newest incarnation as mentor, leader, and cultural icon on Lifetime. Her story mirrors the very transformations she facilitates every day. In so many ways, Sandra's path has been about taking what others overlook or dismiss and revealing the humanity within it. She turned skin conditions once shrouded in shame into stories of triumph. She transformed the guilty pleasure of watching extractions into a community of empathy. And she herself evolved from a solo doctor with a camera into a woman guiding the next generation, expanding her practice and opening her life for the world to see. What makes her legacy powerful isn't just the medical expertise. It's the compassion she threads through everything she does. Patients walk in burdened by years of hiding, by ridicule or isolation, and they leave lighter, freer, more whole. Viewers tune in expecting a pop and leave with a reminder of resilience and courage. Protégés come in eager to learn the technicalities of dermatology, but leave carrying with them Sandra's deeper lesson. Never forget the person behind the condition. Perhaps that is why her story resonates so widely, because at its core, it isn't about pimples or cysts or scars. It's about renewal. The simple yet profound truth that what is hidden can be brought into the light. What weighs us down can be lifted, and what isolates us can become the bridge to connection. And as Breaking Out moves into its next season with 20 more episodes of Lives Transformed, Sandra Lee stands at the center of it all. Not just as Dr. Pimple Popper, but as a mentor, a guide, and a reminder that healing can take many forms. So maybe the real reason we keep watching isn't for the pop at all. Maybe it's for the promise that just like her patients, all of us can find the courage to face what's holding us back and discover the freedom of breaking out.